Hello everyone, good day. So before we begin in our discussion today, let me introduce myself first. I am Jerlyn Piñolosa, 22 years old, currently living at San Isidro Balon, Padada, Davao del Sur, and I am now third year student of Southeastern College of Padada, taking a Bachelor of Secondary Education major in English. So before I began discussing my assigned topic in EDUC 7 with a description of assessment in learning 2, I am going to read our learning outcomes first. Anyways, my instructor of this subject is Mr. Jason Levitus. I'm sorry. Um, so I was assigned in chapter 3, learning outcomes, sources, and characteristics. So we have here a, quote: teach to the individual, not to the curriculum. So we have our learning outcomes here. At the end of the chapter, the student should be able to first explain the meaning of the learning outcomes, state the sources of learning outcomes, explain why learning outcomes must consider needs of industry, explain the characteristics of good learning outcomes, and lastly, determine whether a given learning outcome is good or not and improve on learning outcomes and do not meet standards. Okay, without further ado, let's have our introduction. In OBE, the focus is on learning outcomes. So, OBE means outcome based education. Learning outcomes are naturally associated with learners, thus, the phrase student learning outcomes. Don't get confused, you are still referring to the same learning outcomes focused on the student or the learner. So, students who are well informed about what behaviors are expected of them in core subject or learning activity have a definite guide learning activity and are therefore perceived to attain success. Correlatively, teachers who know very well what they wish their students to demonstrate or perform will be in the best position to align their instructional activities to the desired learning outcomes. Now let's define first the meaning of learning outcomes. What is the learning outcomes? Based on the figure 3 in the chapter 2, outcomes come in the different levels. So as you can see in the pyramid, there are from the top to the bottom. So the intended institutional outcomes, the broadest of all outcomes, are derived from the institution's vision and mission. So are you familiar with our vision and mission? And we have also the goals, but let's discuss that one later. From the institutional outcomes, schools derive their graduate attributes, which are also termed student outcomes. Below the institutional outcomes are program outcomes. So the first one is the uh, institutional outcomes. Then below is the program outcomes. For the teacher education program, the program outcomes are laid down in the memorandum orders from the Commission on Higher Education number 74 to 80s 2017. Higher educational institution which have their own institutional outcomes that are derived from their VMG or the vision mission goals. So I will be showing you the copy of this because I know we are very much familiar with our vision mission goals, of course. May add program outcomes to these outcomes, program outcomes issued by CHED. More specific than the program outcomes are the course outcomes, the outcomes for each subject in the curriculum. So most specific are the learning outcomes, which others call intended learning outcomes or student learning outcomes, to emphasize that these are the knowledge, skills, and values that students are expected to demonstrate at the end of the lesson. So, mean meaning these three must be observed: the knowledge, skills, and values. So, these are the ones assessed in the process of teaching learning and are expected to demonstrate at the end of the lesson. And take note of this: teaching objectives are not the same as learning outcomes because teaching objectives are formulated from the point of the teacher, while the learning outcomes formulated from the point of view of the learner or the student. So, teaching objectives state what the teacher does, while the learning outcomes state specifically what knowledge, skills, or value must be demonstrated by the learner after the instruction. There should be no disconnect between teaching objective and learning outcome. In other words, of OBE, they must be aligned. So you need to take note of this, of that one. Uh, Next, we have sources of learning outcomes. Number one, the institution vision and mission statements are a relevant source of student learning expectations. So for schools, they make a public statement about what the school sees as the purpose of education and how the students should learn. Vision statements outline a school's objectives, and statements indicate how the school aims to achieve the vision. So, public schools refer to the public school system vision and mission statements or as a source of learning outcomes. Private schools are either sectarian or non-sectarian, and their vision and mission statements may be sourced from their respective religious goals. In the case of sectarian schools or their founder philosophy, in the case of non-sectarian schools. So, the pictures above are the vision and mission statements and core values of the Department of Education, Philippines. So, we are very much familiar with this VMG or the vision, mission, goal of the Department of Education, Philippines. So, the first one is the vision. We dream of Filipinos who passionately love their country and whose values and competencies enable them to realize their full potential and contribute meaningful to building the nation. As a learner-centered public institution, the Department of Education continuously improves itself to better serve its stakeholders. Next, we have the DepEd mission to protect and promote the right of every Filipino to quality, equitable, culture-based, and complete basic education where students learn in a child-friendly, gender-sensitive, safe, and motivating environments. Teaching facilitate learning and constantly nurture every learner. Administrators and staff, as stewards of the institution, ensure an enabling and supportive environment for effective learning to happen. Family, community, and other stakeholders are effectively engaged and share responsibility for developing lifelong learners. Next, we have our core values. Makadiyos, makatao, makakalikasan, at makabansa. So, if schools teachers observe constructive alignment, that we expect that their teaching, learning activities, and assessment tasks are aligned with their learning outcomes, what they call learning objectives, which are in turn aligned with the DepEd vision mission Um, statements. Teacher education institution must teach the future teacher to align their learning outcomes, teaching learning activities, and assessment tasks with a vision and mission statement. So, the question here, why is it important to teach the future educator or the teachers to align their lessons with the DepEd vision and mission statements? And the answer of that is developing the school's vision and mission are two of the most important steps towards creating a successful program. Done well, they give clarity and direction for a school. A muddy vision or mission uh, can help to lead to continuing conflicts and a school that was difficulty identifying priorities. So we have number two. The policies and competencies and standard issued by government education agencies such as the Department of Education or the DepEd Technical Education and Skills Development Authority or the TESDA, and the Commission of Higher Education, the CHED, are the prescribed source of learning outcomes. The DepEd issued the K-12 curriculum guide that contains the competencies expected to be taught by teachers in the basic education level. So as you can see in the, I know that we are familiar with the curriculum guide. It likewise issued the Philippine Professional Standard for Teachers or the PPST. The TESDA likewise has a list of competencies per course, and CHED has program outcomes and course outcomes for all programs. The PPST from DepEd and the program outcomes of teacher education from CHED are given below, or see in the look, try to observe the picture I have shown above. So we have number 3. To bridge the gap between academy and industry, expected competencies identified by the different professions, business, and industry should be adapted to ensure the graduates are able to perform as expected in their respective workplace and or professions. So this one is very important and it should be observed. In the Philippines, the various professional regulatory boards of the Professional Regulation Commission have come up with a list of competencies expected of the professionals. So, the board for professional teachers, for example, has a list of these competencies in its table of specification or the TOS, and it is already being discussed, and we are very much familiar with the TOS. Now, for number 4, for schools to be relevant, they should consider the trust and develop goals of national government in the formulation of learning outcomes. Schools are there for society, and society also there for the schools. So them society and schools must be unite. Now, in a global world and for global citizenship, determination of learning outcomes must likewise consider international trends and development. This makes graduates globally competitive amidst talk on global citizenship. It is no longer adequate to work for the realization of learning outcomes that are attuned only to local needs. Sorry for that. Global needs must be given equal attention to make graduates global who are ready to respond to the needs to the both local and global communities. Example of these international developments are the 2030 Agenda of Suitable Development, the ASEAN Qualifications Reference Framework, and the Philippine Qualifications Framework. Program outcomes for teacher education based on the CMOs or the CHED Memorandum Order. CMOs advocates for an outcome-based education. So, policies, standards, and guidelines and establishment of an outcome-based education or the OBE system and higher education institution offering engineering programs. So, now, based on the CMO 70 to 80 2017, the policy standards and guidelines for the teacher education program, graduates of all programs in all types of schools, professional institution, college or university have the ability to, the 6.1 here is the common to all programs in all types of school, the graduate have the ability to, letter A, articulate and discuss the latest developments in the specific field of practice or the PQF level descriptor. Next is effectively communicate in English and Filipino, both orally in writing. And this is very important. And as a future educator, we really need to have this patience to teach our uh, learners or the student to really Effectively communicate in English and Filipino both orally and writing. Letter C, we have work effectively and collaboratively with a substantial degree of independence in multidisciplinary and multicultural teams. PQF Level 6 Descriptor. Recognition of professional, social, and ethical responsibility. And the last one is preserve and promote Filipino historical and cultural heritage. That is based on RA 7722. Next, we have 6.2 or common to the discipline. Teacher education, letter A. Articulate the rootedness of education in philosophical, cultural, historical, psychological, and political context. Next, we have demonstrate mastery of subject matter discipline. Letter C, facilitate learning using a wide range of teaching methodologies and delivery modes appropriate to specific learners and their environments. Last one is develop, innovate curricula, instructional plans, teaching approaches, and resources for diverse learners. We have the 6.3 common to graduates of horizontal type of institution as defined in CMO 46 2012. So, 46 series of 2012 that Philippine higher education is mandated to contribute to building a quality nation capable of transcending the social, political, economic, cultural, and ethical issues that constrain the country's human development, productivity, and global competitiveness. I'm sorry. So we have letter A. Graduates of professional institutions demonstrate service orientation in their respective professions. Next, we have graduates of colleges are qualified for various type of employment and participate in development activities and public discourses, particularly in response to the needs of the communities they serve. And the last one here, letter C, graduates of universities contribute to the generation of new knowledge by the participating in various research and development projects. And for the Philippine Professional Standard for Teachers, that would be this. This topic will be going to discuss by Mr. Jonard Malantok, my group mate. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you learned something from our discussion this day. God bless.